Some would potentially point out or argue that the pandemic has actually just intensified or accelerated a new paradigm of fashion consumption. If people had a choice, what would they rather have? Wealth of luxury fashion or wealth of their health and their loved ones? We hope that they choose the latter. At the same time, it's a very exciting time for the online landscape. There is no longer a one-fit-all model. Seasonality model has been broken. It's been broken for a very long time.
Fashion lovers, thank you for tuning in to the 4 p.m. talk with Jakarta Fashion Week and Dewi Magazine. We talked about how brands are coping in the pandemic. And now we talked about the retail industry. I, Svida Alisjahbana, will once again take you through a beneficial conversation with the experts in today's theme, Reinvention of the Retail Therapy. For this discussion, we have Sanjeev Davidson, founder of London Fashion Consultancy. Sanjeev is no stranger to us, Jakarta Fashion Week, an internationally recognized executive coach with over a decade specializing in fashion brand businesses, accelerators, and innovative brand management, including his major participation in Indonesia Fashion Forward. And also, we have Pandu Rosadi, Managing Director of Ria Miranda, one of the most known brands when it comes to Indonesian modest wear. I'm also proud to say that Ria Miranda is part of the 4th generation Indonesia Fashion Forward, incubated in 2015. Sanjeev, Pandu, welcome to 4 p.m. Talk. Hi, Sanjeev. It has been a while. Now in the pandemic, we cannot fly, we cannot meet in person, but yes, the screen divides us and it's still as good as time to share. And so in this topic of retail, how would you like to share with us of the changes, your point of view in this pandemic?
So let's say if this session is particularly focused on the retail sector, so maybe let me use that as a starting point. So the reality is the pandemic have given a lot of constraints, and particularly to physical space. So that has a huge impact on the physical fashion journey, even though the online fashion journey has, I would say, intensified. So in terms of fashion retail in general, it has huge impacts and implications. It is forcing people to reevaluate their journeys, because if you can no longer go to a physical space, how else do you consume fashion? The other thing with this pandemic, it's actually given people more time to evaluate in terms of needs, wants. So that has also going to have, I would say, a huge impact over the consumption of fashion, because people are having to reevaluate. It may be a positive thing as people have more time. So this, though, has a intense impact, people operating within the fashion retail space, particularly physical space. So the major shifts or changes that I would say are very obvious, they're not necessarily my expert views, but they're very, very obvious, is that the pandemic has forced a new, I would say, journey of fashion consumption. And therefore, the entire fashion ecosystem has to be reevaluated. Some would potentially point out or argue that the pandemic has actually just intensified or accelerated a new paradigm of fashion consumption. So the whole engagement of online fashion consumption. Now, I don't necessarily believe that is an entire worldwide phenomenon. That is the phenomena in developed countries. Because if you ask somebody in parts of India or Africa, they may not be relevant to them, all right? So it depends at what level or particular markets we're talking about. So that's another thing that I think has to be kind of addressed, that there is no longer a one fit all model that can fit. Also, I would say for fashion retail in particular, there are going to be huge challenges because of changes within seasonality, because the seasonality model has been broken. It's been broken for a very long time. So therefore, the pandemic has probably just, I would say, put the last nail in the coffin, excuse that term. I mean, Gucci probably would like to say that they are one of the pioneers or spearheading this whole deconstruction of fashion seasonality. But the truth is that the deconstruction of fashion seasonality started with e-commerce. So I would say fashion consumption in retail is heavily challenged. At the same time, it's a very exciting time for the online landscape. And I would say particularly consumers have been gifted, maybe that's not the term that everyone would like to see this period as, but consumers have probably been gifted a time to reevaluate their fashion consumption journeys in terms of, do I want this? Do I need this? How does it help to build my identification at this given time? So a point that I'd like to highlight regarding that is fashion often is part of building our identity. So therefore, if our identities are also reshaped, because now we have a much more online Zoom, Teams call, any type of other online engagement, our identities are changing. So let's say no matter how much I wish to have a virtual backdrop today, I just thought it's very good to be transparent and authentic and say the truth is I'm out of a spare study bedroom right now from just outside of London, and that's my true identity. So everything I'm expressing through this particular talk is truth from, I would say, my perspective without all the virtual enhancements. So bringing that back to fashion is that's another thing that fashion will have to now contend with. People have come up with all different types of words. I don't really like the word slobwear. I think it's not sexy, but then this is a period of time that maybe is not sexy. Okay, so that's another thing, but that's just my viewpoint. I just that term doesn't really sit well with me because it doesn't dream and romance side of fashion, and that's the thing that I think this whole slobwear phenomenon potentially is missing. But then that's all part of evolution. So fashion as we know it is evolving. The reality is that fashion is used to build our identity. And the truth is, when a human being, according to scientific studies, and don't quote me on this, I think something that someone can go and research, and don't necessarily use Google to research that. If we have to shift or change our patterns over 50 days, they become not necessarily a new normal. I prefer the term that I kind of coined, which is next normal, that we've entered a next normal. So the truth is that this matter. So the next normal, what does that mean for fashion, retail fashion consumption? So if they say, science says, and don't necessarily quote me on this, if human beings experience a new way of existing for 50 or more days, it becomes the next normal. So the next normal we've entered now in terms of, I would say, existence is being very present in a digital landscape. Now, depending what part of the world, a lot of fashion retail, a number of people will build their identity through fashion for their work life. So that is also going to have a huge impact. Now, there are major shifts in terms of how working environments are now going to play out. And a lot of businesses are realizing that they don't necessarily need to have so many people within a physical space. So therefore, when physical space is so costly in terms of a sustainable business model, fashion and non-fashion, that is being reevaluated. So I will say the impact for fashion retail as a whole, it will need to reinvent itself. And necessarily backing slobware within a physical fashion retail space may not be the answer, even though it may seem obvious. The other thing is that there are, I think, very apparent indicators to say that the fashion seasonality system is now truly broken. There is a number of businesses that have been following fashion seasonality that now have a huge amount of inventory that they don't have very clear strategies in terms of what to do, because they cannot predict the behavior of fashion consumption. So I think that is a big challenge for people that operate in the standalone fashion physical environment. Fortunately, if people do have online presence, they will be able to rebalance out how they distribute their products. There are some very interesting emerging entrepreneurs in this given time. They have built very close relationship with factories, knowing that there's a huge amount of excess stock. A number of fashion brands and businesses are not in a position to pay for this stock. A number of them are in administration. So they have kind of starting to develop, I would say, pioneering business concepts to actually help and protect workers. It's not actually for the brands at all. It's to keep the factories open and alive so that the people that work there do not become destitute. So that's a very, very new, I would say, pioneering area that is having much more attention than ever before. Excess stock distribution has always been there, but excess stock for actually the benefit of workers is, I would say, in its optimum for people to understand what that means and how they can contribute to supporting the fashion ecosystem, but from the lowest level. So hopefully that's a good overview for a couple of points. Now, the other thing that I would say is we have got major shopping malls within the UK that are going or have gone into administration. Now, what happens to those huge spaces and shopping malls? That's going to be another question. How would they best serve the community? I know from my experience in Indonesia, people don't just go to the shopping malls to consume fashion. They also go to shopping malls as a social experience. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the UK, but I noticed it more so in Indonesia, just from the, I would say, the expanse of actually just market areas where people can consume non-fashion products, actually consume food and so forth. So I would like to be optimistic about shopping malls, but in this given time, I don't see any immediate recovery until at least 2021 at its earliest. And if there are signs of recovery, those fashion retail spaces will have to reinvent themselves. One of the challenges, I think, for fashion brands and businesses is how are they managing to remain relevant to consumers that now have new fashion consumption journeys. So what I mean by that is, some people, they would weekly go to shopping malls or fashion retail spaces to inform themselves, to socialize, etc., etc. Where now that is not happening. Most of it's voyeur through digital screens, either their phones, tablets, or computers, and also with television. So if fashion retail or fashion brands that operate in the retail space have not found a way to be relevant to their existing consumers' lives, I think their recovery will also be further challenged. Often the brands and businesses I'm speaking to over the last 2 and 3 months, I always push back the question, what are you doing for your consumers to ensure that you remain relevant? So if your relevance has only been that you sell them goods, is that enough? Because the reality is that the competitive space or the market, lots of people are selling goods, but what have you offered to support your consumers through this pandemic? Has it been particular information? Has it been engagement? Has it been entertainment? What have you done? And no one was actually prepared during this period of time, let's say. But I think certain brands or businesses that have really I would say, gone into matters related to sustainability beyond the environment, to also include the working ecosystem. I think the Black Lives Matters movement has also been something that has had a lot of engagement. I think I was using a term a couple of weeks ago, it's Black Lives Matters washing. I also do push back to a number of brands and retailers. Is that what they're doing? So where we had greenwashing with sustainability, is that the new washing? So it's just on a surface level. So the good fortune is the internet, and I don't like this term, and social media, the term is fashion brands and businesses are being called out. So the whole B Corp and woke movement has to be deeper, has to have deeper infiltration within a fashion brand or business. Now, I think the truth is the pandemic has just intensified and shown the fashion industry where all of its weaknesses are in a very short period of time. And I think it's giving us a really good opportunity to rebuild what does the fashion industry look like and what does it actually mean. One of the questions often I'm asked is about luxury, and the consumption of fashion luxury has two forks or two routes that need to be considered. One is that fashion luxury often serves people that have a life that is very social engagement. Often luxury fashion consumption or luxury identity building is about a parade, about markers that are noticed by others that give one relevance within a certain social sphere. So that's just one angle. The thing with that is if people aren't able to have these social engagements or the occasions to adorn these things, is it relevant? So I think the luxury sector is challenged. I know there are signs that, in China, the day or the week the Hermes store opened, their sales were about 2.7 million, something like that, something that seems, I think, just very obvious. I don't think that's headline news. If people have not been able to consume fashion for 2 or 3 months and retail therapy is their thing that keeps them sane, then that's just very obvious. The thing to really measure is how much money was lost over a 2 and 3 month period. And then was that just recovered within a week or 2 weeks? And did that just intensify because people needed to go and consume something that is luxurious fashion to bring themselves out of a particular emotional or psychological mood, that they needed a boost, which they only get through the consumption of fashion, and maybe that was also a treat. So I think a lot of the stories that we read or the information that we're given, we should probably analyze and really take a realistic view. How much money was lost over a period of time? Is that why then the intensity of sales was in when those stores opened? Because if we look at the information now, that peak of sales has not been maintained. So I think that's another challenge. I spoke to a very good colleague of mine who works predominantly within the luxury sector, and he basically said to me, the truth of the matter is certain people consume luxury because of the lifestyle they lead, and if they're no longer leading that lifestyle, it will not prevent them from wanting to buy and invest in luxury pieces. So I use the word invest here now. So I think investment luxury pieces will be more important going forward. It doesn't mean that luxury, I think runways and experiences are not relevant, because often the sales are not achieved from runway pieces anyway. It's not the bulk of the sales. So I think the investment pieces within the luxury sector will become very, very important. But overall, I think my feeling towards the experiences of the pandemic are, first and foremost, it's not necessarily about fashion brands and businesses. I think it's an inverted pyramid where it's really about consumers and journeys of consumption. And they've had something which they probably never had before. They've had a window to reevaluate what's in their wardrobe, what's in their home, safety of their loved ones and themselves, and what does that mean now in terms of how important is fashion for them, and how will they consume that going forward. It's not probably the nicest of things to talk about, but a number of people that have unfortunately lost their lives over the last 2 and 3 months, that have had profile positions or have been pioneers within different industries, from finance to IT, etc., they all have said similar things in their last hours or last week of existing, is that all of their wealth and all of their materialistic things are of no use to them during the darkest hours. So that's another thing that touches a lot of people, because I think if people had a choice, what would they rather have? Wealth of luxury fashion or wealth of their health and their loved ones? We hope that they choose the latter. I say that with an element of humor, because there will always be people that would choose the former. So that, in a nutshell, I would say, is my viewpoints, I would say, on fashion, the fashion physical space, the consumption of fashion. I think the companies that have gone gone into dissolvement or bankruptcy over the years, ranging from American Apparel, Quicksilver, True Religion, all the way through to more I think profile cases in the last couple of years. One of the things is adoption. How do we adopt to how society is changing? So if a number of brands or businesses have not adopted to multi-channel engagement or multi-channel distribution of their goods, you know, we could talk about Roberto Cavalli, we could talk about Barney's, there's so many examples, right? I think that's just the truth, that if we are not open and brave enough to adopt and to actually risk to a degree, but I think it has to be a calculated risk in new ways of operating as a business, then we will see in a very short term that we will no longer be relevant. So of course my heart goes out to brands such as J. Crew, etc. But the truth of the matter is, if the adoption is very late, maybe it's a funny term, but the fashion industry is always late, you know, fashionably late. That term is not there for any reason. So that humors me to a degree, where fashion is supposed to be something that potentially can help shape the edge, cutting edge, and pioneer a new future, a new society. The realities of fashion business is that it can be very late to arrive to the table or the party. It's a non-fashion example, but for me, Toys R Us is a really good case to look at, where they thought they owned a space, and they did own a space in terms of the distribution of toys. The truth is, Amazon, stealth-like matter, came in and just took that away from them in what seemed like an overnight experience, because certain people didn't want to go to huge physical stores to go and look at toys and then try to get their children to leave the space because it's like their Disneyland, and so forth. So I think lifestyle shifts and changes. I did see an interesting article recently, I won't plug any names in terms of where, but about Gojek and how they will help to recover the luxury market in Indonesia. I don't think you can rely on Gojek to do that, but that also reflects how fashion is being consumed, the willingness for somebody not to have to see something. So fashion retail, I think the retailers that are out there, they're already doing it, because, you know, there's examples of it working particularly well. Apple are doing it, where you can have a physical demo of a product. A number of retailers in the UK are now also doing that, where even Harrods are doing that. Harrods is in a very challenging situation. They will have a equivalent of an outlet in Westfield, which is unheard of, the most luxurious department store in the world needing to have an outlet. But that's because of stock inventory and what do we do with this? Because there is still some value in that. So actually, online physical demonstrations of products or environments, so if somebody's working within the homewares area, I think is definitely not just the way forward. It's the reality that if fashion retailers that have physical space do not decide to go down that route, they may be challenged in the near future. That also does create a new set of skills and new job opportunities for young persons who I think are extremely challenged during this time. because what's their future? Where is their direction? So maybe that's also a new series of roles or jobs that will surface, where people will do actually digital demonstrations or presentations of products, and people that are particularly good at it and convert, have a high conversion rate, maybe they will also be celebrated within different teams or environments. Another question came to mind is about older persons and how they consume fashion. I would say, just from my own experience, my older members of our family, they are, I think, very, very sad to a degree, because part of going to shop, and it doesn't have to just be fashion, it could be any type of shopping, is part of their social experience or social engagements. So that's the group that probably I fear most for. The reason being is that as persons who are older become sad or miserable, it does actually affect their health. So how can we find a way to keep older generations part of society? Because loneliness, they say another term, loneliness is a killer. And I don't mean that literally. So part of, I would say, older generations, especially in the UK, they do go to the shopping malls, they go to socialize, they go to see their friends. Some people, unfortunately, they cannot even afford their heating bills. So in the winter, they will go and spend, lots of hours within shopping malls and so forth. So I know fashion history really never talks about that group of persons or that segment, because maybe it's not relevant to them anymore. But the truth is, it's relevant to society. So fashion maybe could have some positive responsibility to part of society that is quite lost and quite lonely, and is very much challenged because of their disconnect with digital, I would say, engagement. Luckily, I'm lucky, my older generations, they are willing to use Zoom, they are willing to use other platforms, FaceTime, WhatsApp, etc. But there are people out there that don't. So hopefully, in a nutshell, that is a lot of information across different points, but hopefully I've covered fashion, luxury, retail, consumer journeys, disenfranchised groups. Yeah. And if you want me to talk about the future, I can also talk about the future. So shall I talk about the future of fashion? Maybe I could do a small rant or ramble if now I've entered the rant or ramble zone. So I think the future of fashion is exciting, first because it's giving opportunity, so therefore new players can come to the market. Recent studies show that emerging brands and new brands have had actually increase in being discovered and conversion rates, and this comes down to people have more time. So if someone's saying to me, should I launch a brand right now? I'd say if it's e-com focused, I'd say definitely. Why not? It's a great time. You're more likely to be discovered right now because people have time. The other thing is that, how are you relevant? Is it the products that make you relevant, or is it your tone of voice that makes you relevant? So you need to choose a tone of voice that makes you relevant. Next thing is, will physical space be of importance going forward? I would say yes, it will, because once we break through, or once we come through this journey of pandemic, people will want somewhere to go. And the truth is, if we look at indicators before the pandemic, if we look at Farfetch exploring physical space, look at Amazon, the number of physical space, if you look at furniture, I would say businesses like made.com wanting to have physical space. So there's always going to be a need or requirement for physical space. Or the thing is, that might have to reinvent, what does it mean and how is it experienced? So outside of all the doom and gloom, I actually think that it's a great time to be in the industry if you can find a way to understand that there are new opportunities that are being created now. So where there may have been gatekeepers that held everything and did not give space for new ideas, new concepts, new businesses, new brands, new tones of voice, this is your time. Take it now. And because at the moment, people are very forgiving. So you can experiment, experience, trial, test everything that you want and wish to do now at probably a lower cost, lower investment. So I would say it's an exciting time. And also you will see the brands or businesses that do that, they will be more relevant to the new consumption journey.
Some of the IFFs are very nimble on that. I mean, we're going to have Pandu to talk from Ria Miranda.
That my team is happy to know that we are in the same boat. that we are facing a storm. So there's a lot of dead stock in my warehouse now, and I'm thinking about how to flush it out. But discount is the last strategy option that I was thinking. But ever since it's a lockdown and we cannot open the store, so online is one of the key stores or key distribution channel that we can push sales through. Our business is not only selling products, not only selling clothes, but we're selling relationship. We're selling how we communicate our products, which has a value.